Hi, my name is Kelly Litza, and I'm here to talk to you about dissociative identity disorder and the book that I read on the case study of Robert Bromley Oxnam entitled A Fractured Mind. Dissociative identity disorder was first discovered about 300 years ago. The disorder is usually diagnosed in young to middle-aged adults, but generally, according to the American Psychiatric Association, it usually begins to develop in young children um, and throughout their early childhood years. According to studies, dissociative identity disorder is said to be brought on by severe continuing trauma, such as sexual abuse or other horrifying stressful events. Examples would be repetitively viewing the death of and funeral of somebody. Um, and that's one particular case that I read an example. Um, the author of this book, Robert Bromley Oxnam, was in his 50s when he was diagnosed with the disorder. In his book, he explains that he was repeatedly sexually abused when he was very young. He didn't say, um, he didn't give a name as to who the perpetrator was, but he did make it clear that it wasn't anybody in his immediate family. Um, uh, Dr. Smith, who was Robert's psychiatrist, and Robert himself believed that this was where the first personality was developed or born into being. As he grew up, Robert was living in a family where ultimate perfection was the ultimate goal, or the overall goal of everything. His father was a perfectionist himself, and everything that he taught Robert had to be done over and over and over and over again until it was absolutely done perfectly. His mother was a big support in Robert in the worst of ways because she went over and above with her cheerleading and would just say, "You can do it, and you're going to do it perfect." So um, that was um, what he says as he continues to be the spawn of his next personality, because he needed somebody to, um, or another alternate to be able to take care of that, the need to be perfect. Um, Other than the symptoms of having more than one personality, Robert also experienced memory loss and severe mood swings, and um, he also drank a lot because of all the problems. He didn't know what was going on in his life, so as most people do, he hit the bottle and became a drunk. And as we found out in our textbook, typical symptoms of this particular disorder include some of the same that Robert had with the memory loss and the obvious multiple personalities. And other things include frequent buying sprees and, again, the alcoholism. Um, and because of the close relations to other disorders, such as schizophrenia and um, bipolar disorder, it's sometimes difficult to diagnose the dissociative identity disorder. And um, as far as diagnostic criteria goes, the American Psychiatric Association labels four things that must take place in order for a person to be diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder. Um, First of all, there's the obvious, having more than one, or at least two, is how it states it in the DSM, at least two separate personalities. And it says that occasionally those separate alternate personalities can have a completely different viewpoint and perspective on the world, and sometimes they need things that maybe the dominant personality doesn't need. For example, eyeglasses are a big thing. Um, as you continue to read the book, I found out that Robert had 11 different personalities, including one female character. Um, our textbook describes each alternate as a fragment of a full personality rather than an entire separate entity. In Robert's case, as he explained it, he had just a few examples were a very young child, a witch, a troublemaker, and a violent teenager. And those were just examples of the 11 of his alters. Um, Secondly, um, as far as criteria goes, the person needs to have a significant amount of memory loss, and it can't just be simple things of forgetting um, just general things and it's slipping your mind and then it comes back later. In the case of dissociative identity disorder, the person has no recollection of what happened whatsoever, and they can't pull it out of their memory banks, regardless of what they try. In Robert's case, he explained that there was one particular time when he was seated with his psychiatrist, Dr. Smith, and as he was there sitting, he said that he sat down on the couch and he was beginning to talk to the doctor, and he remembers um, Dr. Smith saying that it was time to go and his hour was up, and he had no memory of what of time passing, basically. And he looked at the clock and realized that yes, it was true that an hour had in fact passed, but he didn't remember talking to Dr. Smith at all during that time, other than the right after he got there. And Dr. Smith told him that he was talking the entire time, but um, a boy named Tommy was actually talking to Dr. Smith, or a boy that claimed to be Tommy, or go by the name of such, anyways. And another criteria is, um, as far as the alternate personalities go, at least two of them have to take over on a regular basis and control the body and its motions and functions and everything. Um, the after In the book, Robert explains that after that first incident with Dr. Smith, each time that he continued to go back, more and more of his 11 personalities would emerge to talk to Dr. Smith, and they would take over more frequently. And lastly, in when the person is assumed to have dissociative identity disorder, it cannot be possibly caused by drugs or alcohol. Um, it Those two things have to be ruled out in order for the diagnosis to take place. In Robert's case, when he first started seeing Dr. Smith, he was uh, he was constantly drinking and becoming an alcoholic, and in a downward spiral of deep depression and suicidal thoughts and things of that nature. So before Dr. Smith did anything, he sent him to a rehab center where Robert was able to get sober, and he came back and the symptoms were still there. All the rest of the symptoms of dissociative identity disorder. So he was able to diagnose it at that point. Um, so once the diagnosis is in fact made, the dissociative identity disorder, generally only one treatment is used, and that was integration, or fusion, as some people call it. But it's the personalities have to come together either one at a time or in big groups, but regardless, to achieve the full cure, or healing. They have to all come together into one overall personality. Um, so, in order for that to happen, each identity um, has to be able to agree on their values and their beliefs and everything that they're about. Otherwise, um, as Dr. Smith explained in the book, it can become disastrous if something goes wrong and the two identities don't completely agree, because they'll end up re-separating, and it'll get worse from that point if that happens. So Robert Oxnam was diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder in 1990, and at that time he was going by the name of Bob. And Bob was the dominant personality um, at that point in time. And to begin their treatment, Dr. Smith had to make Bob aware of all the alternate personalities that were within him. And so as treatment progressed, Dr. Smith would talk to those separate personalities as they would show their faces, so to speak. And then the when the session was over and Bob would reappear to the surface, he would relay the information to Bob, and they would come to know the personalities would come to know each other within his body. And eventually, in 1992, Bob and Robert, another one of those personalities, and Robbie, being the third one, all came together in one integration there. And Dr. Smith was continuing treatment, and by 1998, he had it whittled the original 11 down to 3. And those 3 were Robert, Bobby, and Wanda. And yeah, those 3 made up the triune that is now known as Robert Bromley Oxnam. Um, at the time that he wrote his book in 2005, he explained that he was still divided into those 3 separate parts, and that at the end of the book he kind of explains that he feels better being separated into those 3, and he doesn't know whether or not he'll ever achieve full integration, but he does know that it is possible, because he explained that he has had temporary integration between the 3 of them, but only if the circumstances call for it. The prognosis for this particular disorder is fairly simple. If the person does get diagnosed, for sure, and they're willing to go through treatment, it can be cured. And Robert, in particular, was told that his case could take a while simply because of the number of personalities, and where he only had 11, it has been found that some people have as many as 100 plus, and that could take a long while, or it could take a short while. It all depends on the opportunities and the willingness to cooperate, and on some occasions many personalities will come together at one time, and sometimes only one will come together with another one. It all just depends on the case. But to sum it all up, the prognosis, it may take a while to get it cured, but in most cases there is still hope, and it's definitely curable according to psychiatrists and psychologists that have dealt with the disorder.